welcome back to the channel. Today we will talk about yet another of my bêtes noires, namely vessels of which we know nothing, but people love to model. This time we're talking about the Mayflower. And as I started, we actually do not know much about her. We know that she was about 100 to 120 tons burden, which has absolutely nothing to do with displacement. Burden is an estimate of the space in the hold of the vessel, or rather how many tons type of cask can be fitted inside the space of the vessel. Therefore, it is a volumetric measurement, but that is not representative of the weight of the vessel and how much water it displaces. Although I quite often see even scholars, let alone ship modelers, mixing the two things. So what do we know about the vessel? Well, as a matter of fact, nothing, really. We do know approximate tonnage. We do know that she was chartered by people known as the Pilgrims. And of course, in traditional American mythology, these are some wonderful people, kind sweethearts that were being suppressed and prosecuted, and they sailed to the promised land to establish their ideal religious freedom. There is a problem with the story, of course. As with most legends of this type, the truth of the matter is that they were extremely unpleasant people. They were kicked out of the Netherlands. The Netherlands, the most open-minded and liberal society that has existed, exists, or is likely to exist in my lifetime, where everybody who wanted to write something scurrilous about a state head and not end up in the Bastille Tower or whatever the appropriate state-run prison would be, went to the Netherlands. The Netherlands were open-minded even towards the Jewish religion, let alone any different versions of the Protestantism. And though they were fighting Catholics, quite a few Catholics actually served the Netherlands. And yet the Pilgrims managed to get themselves kicked out of there. Mostly that is because they made a real nuisance of themselves. So they sailed west to be given the freedom to stone women and hang them for witches and any other pleasant thing that occurs to their open minds and liberal disposition and love of freedom. Okay, more seriously, however, let's talk about the ship. We do have the Mayflower II, which was constructed in the 1950s, crossed the Atlantic, barely, and ever since has been probably the most visited part of the exhibit of the Plimoth Plantation in Massachusetts. And it is very well worth visiting the vessel. I have had the opportunity not only to see it as a museum piece, but also while it was undergoing extensive repairs at the Mystic Seaport shipyard, DuPont shipyard. It is an interesting vessel, and the logical question is how representative it is of the original. I would say little to not at all, and little headed south. William Baker, who designed the vessel, essentially, was a very well-known naval architect, very capable man, quite widely read, who did the best that he could within the limits of the material with which he could work. We had virtually no archaeological examples properly excavated from this period yet. So he had to depend on the eternal friend, namely iconography, and also on recently at the time published by the Nautical Research Society in England manuscript on shipbuilding from the first half of the 17th century. It was edited and published by the same people who found it and mostly wrote the early issues of the great maritime historical journal Mariner's Mirror. That treatise is interesting. It is quite detailed. It provides quite a lot of instruction on how to design a vessel. But it is questionable in what period actually it is focusing. In fact, we have a whole collection of such treatises from the first half of the 17th century, really from the very early into the century until the 1620s. There is another one from the 1630s, and after that, of course, the best known and easiest to follow is Dean's Doctrine from 1670, which specialized in warships. There is another treatise that is easily accessible. It is online by Edmund Bushnell, which dates to 1659. That produces the easiest to follow instructions, but it is essentially a cookbook. It has a recipe. This is how you build this size of vessel. It was written specifically for New England shipwrights because, as the author says, there are plenty ship carpenters in New England nowadays, plentiful timber to build ships, but there is no knowledge of how to design the vessel. And that is what the treatise was written for. It is simple, it is straightforward. Maybe in a different video at some point we will talk more about Bushnell and the other treatises, including with practical examples of how to operate it and how to produce shapes of vessels. For the time being, we will return to the earlier two treatises, the one that was very evocatively named a treatise of about 1620, and another one that was more recently published in historical terms, I believe it was in the 90s actually, by Barker, another independent great British scholar of early ship design, an engineer by education and design. He dated it to 1610, but I beg to differ. That treatise, in my humble opinion, could not have been written before the 1620s too, because it specifically criticizes three-decked ships as too large, and previously in the good old days we didn't build three-decked ships. These are unseaworthy, they are not maneuverable, they cannot turn quick enough, etc., etc., etc. All the criticism that you can think of. But the truth of the matter is that by 1610 there were no three-deckers, with the exception of the Prince Royal of 1610. That was the only three-decker built. And yet from after the reformation of the Navy and the reforms of the 1819 Commission proposals, a series of 6 three-deckers were constructed, with the three-deck only partially armed, just as it is on Vasa. Ergo, if the treatise is speaking of three-deckers in plural and criticizing that such ships are being built, the treatise cannot predate 1620. End of this part of the bracket. So let's return to the vessel. It is this, probably the 1620, circa 1620 treatise that Baker used, together with some other contemporary specifications, and of course the ever-present Matthew Baker elements of ancient English shipwrightry. He deliberately aged a little bit the design of the vessel, working on the assumption that Mayflower was not a new ship. She was not in particularly good condition. She was an aged vessel by the time she made her historical voyage to establish the Plymouth Plantation. And based on this, the replica Mayflower II really looks more like a late Elizabethan vessel than a current merchantman of the early 17th century. On the other hand, he did a very good job of the framing of the vessel. He recognized that the timbers would be overlapping, that they're unlikely to be interconnected, and they most definitely are not going to be doubled, since double sawn frame construction in the English lands did not emerge until the very end of the 17th century. That much archaeology and history tell us together in the archival material. So that is how the Mayflower II came about. So any attempts to model the original Mayflower, in truth, are using the drawings by Baker, and therefore are not modeling the Mayflower, but are modeling the Mayflower II. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, I have to give credit where credit is due. I believe that my good friend, the wonderful shipmodeler David Anshaw, was commissioned to build an early 17th century wreck. In fact, he was asked to build a Mayflower and he completely refused to do it because he builds historical models. So he agreed to construct a model and published it subsequently in Nautical Research Journal, a model of a typical early 17th century merchant vessel. And with that, I have no argument whatsoever, because his interpretation is as good as anybody else's. And really, this is how I would describe Mayflower II as possible look of a very late 16th, early 17th century merchant ship. While we are on the subject, it should be pointed out that the vessel was steered. Thank you, Imbir, for that. Your help is deeply appreciated by me and all our viewers. Evidently, he thinks that I have been talking for too long. Dear boy. Returning to what I was going to say, the vessel was intended to be steered with whipstaff, but I believe that on the crossing it actually used a steering wheel, which has since been removed. She steered again now at the dock with a whipstaff. She was not found to be particularly stable on course or particularly good seaboat, partially because she has a very high and very narrow stern. That proportion is probably misinterpretation of the original documentation. And this really is the value of such vessels that claim to be quote-unquote replicas of olden times. Very few vessels really deserve this term. I think I have spoken already about this, really only the Viking ships from Roskilde. But there are things that we can learn even from the less accurate or less stringent and narrowly interpreted reconstructions, like, Mayflower, the Kalmar Nickel, God bless her captain for being willing to play with us archaeologists and to experiment, and some other vessels that come to mind, Daufken in Australia, etc. Yes, there are things that we can learn from them. But as far as the Mayflower, one thing that we need to understand is that any models of the Mayflower are just an interpretation of what a vessel of similar proportions to her may have looked like, because the only thing we have is the tonnage. And there are formulas by which you can calculate the tonnage, but every mathematician will tell you that the formula with 3 unknowns cannot actually be solved. So it is the interpretation of the shipwright or naval architect. In the case of Mayflower II, Baker did a fantastic job. He interpreted the documents and he produced a very pretty vessel that brings enormous joy to its visitors and to those of you who have been lucky enough to see it at sea, under sail, and to sail on the same course with that vessel for a while, as we have in the past. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, for once, a fairly short video, I bid you a very fond goodbye and a most wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching and for liking.